Hi, this is Emily, and I'm an out boss.
Hello, Out Bosses. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. Before jumping into the show, I wanted to extend a virtual invitation to our weekly office hours, which take place every Friday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. We've opened up our office hours to all LGBTQ plus business owners looking for additional support during COVID-19. So if you need some extra inspiration, please consider joining our mailing list so that you can register for these calls. And I am super excited to introduce Emily Heyward, who is joining us all the way from the Big Apple. So Emily, welcome to the show. Really excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. So for folks that aren't familiar with Emily and her amazing work, this is just a little bit of a glimpse of her bio. So Emily is the co-founder and chief brand officer at Red Antler, the leading brand company for startups and new ventures. Emily works closely with founders to develop purposeful, strategic visions for their startups and has led branding efforts for top companies such as Casper, Allbirds, Betterment, and Prose. In 2018, Red Antler made Fast Company's list of the most innovative companies in marketing and advertising, and Emily was recognized as one of Entrepreneur's most powerful women of 2019. So Emily, there are so many other amazing awards and honors that you have personally received, as well as your business. And I have a hunch we're going to be able to talk about some of those in the interview. But for our listeners who are new to the concept of branding, maybe they're just getting started in business, I feel like that's kind of the sweet spot for you. Can you just talk a little bit more about Red Antler and what makes your business so unique?
Of course. So I think that at a surface level, a lot of people hear the word branding, and if they don't think about branding cows, they probably think about things like logos and color palettes and taglines, and all of that is really important and is definitely a big piece of the puzzle. But at Red Antler, how we think about branding is really thinking about the entire consumer experience with a business. So everything you see and touch, and most importantly, feel, that's all branding. And of course, that includes things like packaging and the website, but it also includes your interactions with customer service. It includes the product itself. So our role is to work primarily with startups, and many times we're actually getting involved before a business even launches. So I'm an entrepreneur who works closely with many other entrepreneurs. And we help founders think about how to launch their business through the lens of brand and really make sure that from day one, they're considering every aspect of the experience and how it's going to affect people and the kinds of connections that they can build with their audience.
And what's one thing about branding? So you said, obviously what you do is so much more than just the logo and kind of the fonts and letterhead. When you're working with folks who are just starting up, what's most surprising to them when you're talking about all that you do, all that Red Antler does, that they just didn't even anticipate when talking about this concept of branding?
I think a lot of times founders are surprised at how much their brand actually influences their internal culture and decisions that they need to make that a consumer might not even see. I think that when you're starting out, it's so valuable to really create that focus around, what you want to stand for and the idea that you want to own in the world. And it ends up influencing things far beyond your external identity. It really can influence even how you think about hiring, or even what features you should prioritize and how quickly you want to grow into other areas. So it really becomes all encompassing if done correctly. And it's not something that you do once and then move on to the important part, right? It's not like, oh, cool, I'm good. I hired a branding company and now that's great. I can get back to focusing on growing my business. It really becomes the lens through which you view all of those choices and how you show up in the world.
I really like that. So just on this piece of intentionally creating culture, Can you give us an example of, say a company is just getting started up, so they want to demonstrate their commitment to including people that are really representative of their ideal customer base. How do you help them kind of think through all pieces of the branding components that you do that can communicate their vision of being more inclusive as a business, if that's one of their values?
Sorry, I just want to make sure I understand the question. Do you mean communicating externally that they're inclusive, or do you mean in terms of their hiring practices?
Yeah, I would say, when you're talking about branding and how it really influences the culture of the business, both, if it's easier to do externally, let's go in that direction.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think it's both, right? It has to start from within. And I think that there are a lot of companies that try to talk the talk without walking the walk. And I actually love that we're living in an era where like you're going to get called out, it may not happen immediately. You might be able to get away from it with it for a while. But I do think we've seen, many stories of companies that purport to be this like very values driven brand. And then it finds out that internally they're not treating their employees right, or, they're not actually sort of diverse, even though they're trying to own that as a core value. So I do think that anything that you're putting forward externally needs to be true through and through, or at least it needs to be something that you're seriously working on. But then I think it just becomes a question of being really clear about what you stand for and evaluating all your communications through that lens. And, companies are going to make missteps. Every company does it. It's impossible to be perfect. Consumers are paying very close attention, which is a good thing. But then I think it's about just having humility and admitting mistake and correcting from there. I would say having a diverse team is actually a really great way to avoid some of those missteps. If we think back in the past year, some of the like biggest gaffes that brands have made, my guess is that if they had people on the team that more reflect their target audience, they would have been like, no, don't think that that's a good idea. Like that feels like cultural appropriation, or, whatever else they might be doing wrong.
Yeah. I really love that response. And you have such an opportunity of helping startups in particular kind of avoid those mistakes that you're talking about with some of the companies that you had in mind about the gaffes that they made over the past year or more. And I wonder, why startups? Why did you, when you were thinking about your ideal clients, why did you land on startups? Because for every company, we can always improve on our brand. So what was the draw there for you?
Totally. So I started my career working in advertising on big traditional brands, and some of them had literally been around over 100 years and probably hadn't changed that much during that time. And I learned a ton through that experience, but I started to grow frustrated because there was only so much that we could affect. We had to come up with new campaigns every year and make them feel fun and splashy and relevant and exciting, but we couldn't change anything about the product. And I started to feel like we were solving the wrong problem. We were putting this layer of communication on top of something that wasn't ultimately serving people in the right way. So the vision to get involved with startups really came from a desire to go further upstream and be able to affect the brand from within. It's really everything we've been talking about, right? It's like, how do we make sure that what we say we stand for is true through and through, and that we can design a product experience from scratch that's actually going to deliver on the things that we're promising in our communication.
I really appreciate that. And I wanted to touch on your career in advertising. So before you were running your own company and thinking about the folks that you worked for, talk to us a little bit about the decision to go out on your own. What was going on right before you made that entrepreneurial leap, and what was the motivation to move forward with such a big move?
So I was at a very, very big global agency, going to Midtown every day, still in the days of like having to wear business casual and just starting to feel really unfulfilled. And then I took an intermediate step where I joined up with my friend JB, who's now my co-founder. And he had been hired to run the New York office of a New Zealand agency that was looking to expand to the States. So he was doing that pretty much on his own. You know, his bosses were literally across the world. I came on to do that with him, and it was a great crash course in entrepreneurship without the risk. You know, like, we were being paid a salary, but it was just the two of us, and we had to figure out how to get everything done. So, you know, I realized I'm very lucky that I was almost given this sort of softer landing into entrepreneurship. But during that time, it was right when the New York startup scene was getting going. And that's when we started to get introduced to founders, because there were just two of us, and people would say, oh, you should meet my friends. They're starting a company. Maybe they need advertising. And what we realized through those conversations is that while they didn't need advertising per se, they did need help in how to think about who's their target audience? Like, what does that person really need and care about? And then how do we make sure that everything we're doing is delivering on that need? And that's where we came into the picture. It was like, let's help you take your incredible vision and crystallize it and focus it and turn it into a brand that people can fall in love with.
So it sounds like with finding JB, you know, you had kind of an entrepreneur whisperer with you, and I'm wondering, you know, we've talked about partnerships on the show before, and a book that I've referenced in the past is Rocket Fuel, which is kind of this blend of, you've got the kind of visionary and kind of the implementer, and I'm wondering, like, of the dynamic that you all have. Does that hold true for you? Do you feel like you play a stronger role on one of those two kind of titles, or are you both kind of a blend of both visionary and implementer?
I think that both of us might skew towards visionary, but visionary about different things. And I think actually, as our business has grown, we've had to surround ourselves with more implementers. Yeah. It's been really, really valuable having those people on board. JB is amazing at thinking about the vision for Red Antler and where our company should go. And I'd say I'm much more involved with our clients, thinking about their brands and how to bring those brands to life.
Yeah.
So between the two of us, you know, I think we had that covered. But in terms of getting it all done, you know, we've certainly needed a lot of help along the way from some really brilliant and talented people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, it's that visionary of kind of like the opportunities ahead and kind of looking inside of the business, like what's possible in terms of the, you know, the products and services that you can provide for your customers to continue to dazzle them, which is great.
Definitely focused on that.
Yeah. Yeah. A question on, so this is kind of like a two-part question because we're in interesting times right now. So I'd say, you know, pre-2020, you know, as you started your business and kind of up until, you know, December 31st of 2019, what became possible, you know, in December of last year that you had no idea that you could anticipate when you and JB first got started?
Ooh, good question. Well, something that's been interesting lately, actually, is that we've started working with some more established companies who are drawn to us because of our work with startups. Mm-hmm. So it's not like that was the secret plan all along. It's not like we were like, let's spend, you know, over a decade working with startups so bigger companies will hire us. And we have no intention of moving away from our startup work. But it has been interesting that a lot of the companies that the brands that we helped launch are disrupting are now coming to us saying, hey, hold on, like, we don't want to fall behind. How do we create like the next hot thing that everyone falls in love with instead of being left in the dust?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I wonder, like, and I feel like you all know this best since you work with startups, do you feel like the innovation that startups can do, is it just sheerly because there's more agility, startups are more nimble, there's less people, or is there something else that's going on for maybe those more established brands that you're now inside, you're working with them and you have maybe a different perspective on it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's anything that would be all that surprising, right? I think that the bigger you get, there's more at stake, there's more to lose. You know, you have a baseline that you have to uphold. You have way more stakeholders weighing into every decision. You just can't be as open to risk, right? And you certainly, to your point, can't be as nimble and flexible. But I also think that larger, more established companies are realizing that the riskiest thing they could do right now is to stay put. Yeah. And we're actually seeing a lot of companies coming to us saying, like, we have to think more like a startup because all these new brands are launching and encroaching on our business and no category is safe.
I like what you said about the riskiest thing is to stay put. So, we were talking about what was possible December of 2019. Now here we are, we're well into the spring, almost the summer, living through COVID-19. So in terms of anticipation, I don't think any of us could have predicted where we are now. I'm wondering for you, how are you able to respond as a business, and what are you seeing? What are you seeing? Not so much about, maybe clients that aren't kind of re-upping or working with you, but where are the opportunities in the work that you do every day? And what would you say to maybe a startup that really wanted to work with you before COVID-19 and where we are now? Like, what would you say to them about the value proposition of continuing that work with Red Antler?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that one lucky thing for us is that we actually started our business 3 months before the global financial crisis. So, another time of incredible uncertainty and fear. And I think that having started our business in that climate set us up with a mentality that we could weather anything that came our way. And really ingrained within us a scrappiness, a flexibility, and like a willingness to kind of ride with the times and like figure it out and make it work. That's really built into our DNA. And I think that, I'm not going to lie, like this has been really tough. It's been really stressful. Obviously, we're doing everything we can to protect the team, protect the business, and protect our clients. But I think that a fortunate thing about our position is that times of crisis can actually be times of amazing innovation. And we're seeing entrepreneurs come to us with ideas that are even more relevant than they were 4 months ago, because they're solving real problems for people. And I think those problems have been brought into high definition, now that all of these sort of structures around us are crumbling. So I don't think that innovation is dead. I don't think creativity is dead. We obviously have to find other ways to work. And in terms of our business, like we're being more flexible than ever about the types of partnerships we're structuring and how to make things affordable for people who want to partner with us. But I think that this can also be a time of like great change and positivity if that's the approach that a business chooses to take.
Yes. And I really appreciate that you talked about, the kind of banking, housing collapse of 2008 and the fact that you got started like right in the midst of all of that. So that's got to give you a great deal of confidence of, if we made it and weathered through this past winter, this kind of current environment that we're in, you've been there before, what that looks like, and you're so much more established now as a business. So that's definitely to your advantage. And I think it's a nice segue to kind of jumping into who you are in the world, being a member of the Rainbow family. And something that we talk about on the show a lot is the resiliency that we gain by some of the things that happen in our lives that are challenging for us, being LGBTQ folks. And so I'm wondering if you could share with the audience probably a time when maybe you were working for someone else. I don't imagine this showing up at Red Antler since you're setting the tone and the culture as the leader there, but where it may have been difficult for you to show up authentically in your work because you're a member of the LGBT community. And if there's an example that you feel comfortable sharing with our audience, maybe just some takeaways of how you were able to kind of navigate that moment, what you learned from it, and maybe some advice that you could share to folks just thinking about how authentic they can be in their own work.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm sure this isn't unique to me, but I think probably the hardest time period was when I was going through the process of coming out. And, I was already in the working world and was at a job where a lot of the people who met me at that job met me when I was still dating men. And then all of a sudden I had a girlfriend. And I think especially because it was a change, it felt like such a big announcement. And I think, that's right. One of the biggest challenges I think that queer people face, right, is that just a casual mention of what you did over the weekend feels like this incredibly personal reveal, right? Like instead of just being like, oh, I went to the farmer's market with my boyfriend, all of a sudden it's like, and I'm gay, and now you're thinking about my sex life,
Yeah.
So I think that that was a hard period for me for so many reasons. And I, was very selective about who I told at work and certainly who I introduced my girlfriend to. I think that midway through that process, I switched jobs. And that was a moment in time where I was like, you know what? If I don't go into this new job just being incredibly straightforward about who I am and what I'm all about, I'm just going to have to go through this all over again. It was almost like a clean break. And I was like, now's the time to just start owning this unapologetically. And it was a really great shift because in doing that, I realized like, it's just not that big of a deal. And obviously I'm incredibly lucky that I was in a creative field with people who were accepting, and not everybody has that privilege at all. But for me, it was never that I was actually unsafe. It was my own insecurity and discomfort that I had to overcome.
Yeah. Yeah. When you came out on the job, were you working in New York or somewhere else?
Yeah, I was in New York, and part of actually why I took that next job was because it was working for a gay woman. And I think that that was incredibly inspiring to me to have a boss who was a lesbian. And this was right when I was going through everything, and I was able to just be completely open. And it was actually like a bonding factor, between the two of us. So that's, an incredibly fortunate experience. And I think certainly, not one that I at all take for granted. I do think that now that I'm in a position of leadership and able to set a tone, I try to work in that I'm gay, like as quickly as possible into conversation. Like I just want everyone to know. I want everyone in new business conversations to know. I want new clients to know, because I feel like it's such an important part of who I am. And I don't want to be around people for whom that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, what you had shared about leaving a company where you were going through your own process, there might have been a degree of uncertainty of, sure, you're in New York City, and you're not sure what the reaction might be from colleagues who it feels like you're kind of reintroducing yourself. And the fact that you left that job and were attracted to work at another organization where, the owner of the company is an out woman, right? She's a lesbian, and, you were able to see it to be it. And the fact that you're now kind of reflecting a real comfort in who you are and sharing that certainly will attract people that appreciate you being authentically yourself. And I'm sure for those folks who work with you, just to see you in that role, I'm sure is inspiring, other folks, whether they're LGBT or not, of just knowing that they could show up and be more of themselves so they can do good work. Right. I mean, that's kind of the goal.
I certainly hope so. That's definitely what we're aiming to achieve.
Yeah. And thank you for doing that. I know that that's not always easy. And, I wish that more LGBT business leaders could do that, or if they're in the position to do it, that they just do it, right? Because it really does have a positive impact. And I, personal opinion here, I do think that it saves lives in a lot of respects. So on this piece of lived experience, I'm wondering for you, and your experiences of being a part of the LGBT community, what about, being out? What about being a part of the rainbow family allows you to stand out as a successful business owner? Like, do you believe that you have rainbow superpowers that just allow you to be really effective in what you do? And if so, what might be one or two of those superpowers?
Definitely. I think we all have rainbow superpowers. Yes. Everybody, well, we all within our special community. So I think the number one for me would be empathy. Yeah. And empathy is so important in my role. Certainly in terms of building brands, right? We have to get into the minds and hearts of people that might not look like us and figure out how to create something that they're going to love. So that's an incredibly important part of my work. But also as a business leader, I think in terms of building hopefully a great, positive, inspiring, and supportive culture, empathy for the team and what people might be going through. And I think that LGBTQ people have more finely tuned empathy just because we have to, because of what we've been through. I think going through an experience that in the best of circumstances is still really difficult and traumatic and, hard, just hard, teaches you to understand people's circumstances and to be more open-minded and to not make assumptions and to listen.
Yes, I 100% agree with you on that. And on this piece of empathy, and which I strongly believe, whether you are or you're not LGBTQ, you're in a leadership role, it's really crucial to leading inclusively. I'm wondering, what advice would you have for the startup business owners you work with, or, the context that you have in New York City of folks that are running their own businesses, of what they could do to showcase their own empathy for LGBT communities right now? That I'm sure you're aware, with the Supreme Court, they're about to make a decision on whether LGBT workers across the United States are covered under existing civil rights protections or not in the workplace. And regardless of what they rule, what could those business owners within your networks do just to kind of demonstrate at a time where some LGBT folks, some LGBT workers are feeling insecure, or just kind of, how will this impact my life? What could business owners say in this moment if they embrace the spirit of inclusion and they want more LGBT folks on their team?
It's a great question. And I think it should start with a formal assurance to the team that these are the rights that they have working at this company, and that these are not rights that they need to depend on from the government. And, it's almost how sort of states are responding kind of against like the federal rule right now and sort of saying, hey, look, we're going to make our own rules. I think companies can do that too. It's like, no matter what happens, we're going to protect you, and here's how. And like, this is true for every single person on the team, regardless of their sexual orientation, race, gender, etc.
Yes.
I also think, things like being sensitive to pronouns, I think it goes such a long way. And it may not seem like a big deal, but I think to the people that, are thinking about their pronouns, it's a really fucking big deal, right? Oops, sorry, didn't know if I'm allowed to curse.
Oh, you totally can. FAA doesn't apply here. Just be you.
So yeah, I think regardless of whether you think you have, a trans person on your team or a non-binary person on your team, it almost doesn't matter. I think it just sets a tone that if someone is considering a transition or is questioning their gender identity, that this is a safe place for them.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying. I think overall, people need to know that where they work, that their work is valued and that their employer has their back. And you just offered a couple of really simple things that I hope more businesses, and in particular, those business leaders who tune into this show, I'm sure they're doing a lot of this right now for their own employees. And the piece on really building a gender inclusive workplace, right, for trans and non-binary folks, the simple things, just kind of taking a beat to, in meetings, asking people their name and their pronouns and modeling that as a leader, that really, really sets a great tone for folks that, again, might be uncertain, kind of similar to your younger self when you were coming out in a workplace where you're like, I don't know, I have to reintroduce myself to everyone. I'm not sure where I stand. How different would that have been if we're in a time, like now, where your boss in that particular job had put out a positive statement about LGBT people and what the workplace policies were. So yeah, setting the tone is huge. And I think that goes back to what you were talking about with empathy. So I really thank you for that, for sharing. On this topic of kind of social responsibility, and you shared a bit about helping organizations, kind of startups in particular, think really intentionally about their culture. What are ways that you see out in the world of businesses giving back to LGBT communities, or ways that Red Antler does right now that you could share with our audience?
So I think the way not to do it is by once a year posting a rainbow flag on your Instagram. And, we have a very sizable LGBTQ population at Red Antler, and we had a great, healthy debate about all of these corporate brands that jump on the Pride bandwagon in June. Mm-hmm. And, it's hard, right? Like, in a way, I'm glad that the mainstream thing to do is to support Pride. Like, I think that's a huge change even from, 15 years ago. But I think that it can also feel very surface. And I think like with any social good platform, it needs to be much more ingrained, right? And much more significant than just a social media post. In terms of what we're doing, so we actually are very fortunate right now that we're helping launch a queer-owned business that's targeting the queer community, and we've been able to staff it with an entirely queer team. And that's been an incredible project for the whole team working on it. I can't talk too much about what the business is going to do, but it's going to be very, very meaningful. It's not just like selling fun products to gay people, although that would be fine too. But it really is solving some pretty major problems. And to be able to put our creative efforts towards something that's going to make such a difference in so many people's lives, as well as supporting, a gay entrepreneur that has this amazing vision, and be able to do it from such an authentic place with a team that has all gone through these experiences, is certainly one of the most meaningful things I've gotten to do in my career.
I love that. I can't wait for you to share when the company can come out. And I hope you send that business owner our way, because we would love to interview them once it's out there.
I will.
So
She's
good foreshadowing.
Amazing. I will tell her about this, and I'm sure she'd love to.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, yeah, I think that's the superficial pieces. So many of us within the Rainbow family can sniff that out and just kind of say, okay, that's a start, right? But seeing these really concrete examples of how much further businesses can go to give people what they need, right? And then, communities value that business even more for recognizing some of the disparities that are out there. So I appreciate that. I know that you have a book coming out called Obsessed. Do you want to talk just a little bit about the book, who it's for, and when we can get our hands on it?
I'd love to. So it's called Obsessed, Building a Brand People Love from Day One. And it's about really the new rules of brand building and how the businesses of today are able to come out of the gate and form these incredible relationships with their consumers, and how so many categories have been fundamentally changed through this new wave of businesses that's really doing such a better job of tapping into people's values and putting their values front and center. So, it talks through a lot of examples of brands that are getting it right. And I'd say that the book is certainly perfect for anybody who's thinking about starting a business or who's in the midst of the process of starting a business. But I also think it would be interesting just for people who wonder, like, why do we love the things we love? And why am I so obsessed with Sweetgreen or SoulCycle? So, there's certainly like a pop culture element to it too. I tried to write it in a way that's really conversational and understandable for anyone. My team was saying they wanted to share it with their parents, so their parents would finally understand what we do for a living. So it's definitely not academic, and I think it's very accessible, and that was intentional when I wrote it.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on getting it to this place where it's coming out Pride Month, which is awesome. So
yes.
I know that that's a huge, huge lift. So congratulations to you on it. A question I like asking people is, well, two questions on the book writing process is, one, is writing something that comes natural to you? Are you kind of a writer who speaks? Are you someone where it's more you like to kind of externally process? You're a speaker who wants to kind of capture all of your genius into the writing process?
So I am a writer, and writing is a huge part of sort of how I came up in my career and what my role is. I think the difference is the kind of writing that I do for work is all about taking something incredibly complex and boiling it down into as few words as possible, like 3 words if you can do it, right? Whereas writing a book, obviously, you need to create a lot more content. And I didn't want to feel like I was repeating myself or just filling pages with words for the sake of it. So I think expanding my thinking and telling a broader story was definitely a challenge. But luckily, I love to write. And I think that with each chapter, once I got past the hump of the first paragraph, it certainly flowed more easily. And, the good news is that I had so many brands to draw from that each have amazing stories. And that really in itself, helped the book be written. Just all the stories that I wanted to showcase and the amazing founders that I was able to speak with. So that part of it was really rewarding.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And just kind of from, getting started over a decade ago in your business, right? I mean, so many probably amazing transformations that you could talk about the value of what you do and, where those businesses are at today because of the work that you've done with them. Another question, and maybe just kind of your advice, for those folks who tune into this show, we've got a lot of amazing business owners who are doing, many are purpose-driven business owners. So what advice would you say to those folks who might feel like, I'm in marketing, there's enough marketing books out there. No one really wants to hear from me. What advice would you say to that kind of person who might doubt their message or their own expertise or lived experience and what they have to contribute to a field that might already be kind of surrounded with many great books already?
I think that the rules are being rewritten every day. And I think that anyone who thinks that like, oh yeah, the rules of marketing, that's already captured in a book and I don't need to, worry about writing a new one. The world is changing so rapidly. And I think like who better than the people who are at the forefront of that to help redefine what it means to build a winning brand in the 21st century. And it's going to continue to change. So I think that we're living in an incredibly exciting time. And I think that everything is up for grabs in a good way. And everyone has a voice to contribute to that and help shape it.
Yes. And you see that firsthand with so many startup founders who are rewriting and disrupting in lots of really exciting ways. So 2 more questions for you, Emily. The first is for those folks just thinking about getting started, they haven't yet taken that entrepreneurial leap. What would be, some advice that you would give those folks just to kind of continue to consider and maybe take that first step towards being their own boss?
Well, I think the most important thing is to ensure that you have a meaningful connection to the business that you would want to start. I've definitely met with entrepreneurs where it's very clear that they were just bored in their corporate job and did a brainstorming exercise to figure out a business idea. And it's not to say that those won't succeed, but it's a really long, lonely, hard journey being an entrepreneur. And I think that it's a lot easier if you feel compelled to see the business that you're launching in the world and that you feel like there's nothing else you could be doing. It's almost like being an artist in that way. It's like people don't choose to be an artist, right? It chooses them. And I think in a way, the same should be true for entrepreneurship because it's not easy and there's going to be failure along the way and struggle. And you need something that's pushing you forward, which needs to be a belief in the importance of what you're doing.
Yes. And that's so on brand because you have to be obsessed with your business, I think.
Yes,
to
you
kind of see it through.
That is so true. I think that the last line of my book says something to that extent, actually, that the founders need to be obsessed too.
Yeah. I agree. It's a hard journey. And when you are so excited by what you do, even if it's, you have to do the admin things in order to keep the business going forward, it's like staying true to that vision is so key. And I think the obsession is important. So last question, I'm super excited, about your book. I'm excited about the work that you're doing. Where can folks find you online just to get all of the good knowledge that you're offering and just to keep their fingers on the pulse of when the book's coming out?
Absolutely. Well, the book comes out June 9th and it is available for pre-sale in many places, but I would say go to bookshop.org where it is available for pre-sale and you can support an independent bookstore while you're at it. That's my suggestion.
All right. Bookshop.org. All right. So we will include that in the show notes for sure. So Emily, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate all that you shared. And I'm sure our listeners are kind of loving what you've offered and hopefully they're going to invest in your book as well. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. For our out bosses, I want to thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. It's always a privilege to connect with you and inspiring out bosses like Emily. So if you want details from today's show notes or the show itself, you can go to outentrepreneur.com, or to make it even easier, you can text OUTBOSS, all one word, to 33777, and we will hook you up with those show notes. We'll also make sure that you are connected to our weekly office hours, which are taking place every Friday from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. Pacific. So if you want to end your week by hanging out with other amazing LGBT bosses, entrepreneurs, that's the place to be. So I hope to see you there. And for now, keep being your authentic selves 100% of the time.